There is a conversation happening right now that no one is speaking out loud. It is happening at the dinner table, where someone keeps refilling their glass, even though no one else has touched theirs. It is happening in the meeting room, where one person leans back while everyone else leans in. It is happening in the text message that took 4 hours to arrive, but was answered in 4 seconds. It is happening in the silence after someone asks, "Are you okay?" And the other person smiles too quickly, too brightly, and says, "I'm fine," but their eyes do not match their mouth. There is a conversation happening right now that no one is speaking out loud, and most people are missing every single word of it. I want you to think about the most important relationship in your life. A partner, a friend, a parent, a colleague, someone who matters deeply to you. Now ask yourself, honestly, how well do you really know them? Not what they have told you about themselves. Not the version of themselves they have chosen to present, but the deeper, quieter version. The one that shows up in what they do when they are tired. The one that reveals itself in how they treat a stranger with no social stakes. The one that exists in the gap between what they say they want and what they actually choose, day after day, when no one is keeping score. Most of us believe we know the people closest to us, and in some ways we do. But if you pay close attention, if you truly begin to observe rather than simply see, you will discover something unsettling and extraordinary at the same time. You will discover that people are always telling the truth. Not always in their words, but always in their behavior. A man tells you he values honesty, but you have watched him shade the truth twice this week when it was convenient. A woman tells you she is not upset, but her arms are crossed, her responses are clipped to single syllables, and she has not made eye contact with you in 20 minutes. A colleague tells you the project is his top priority, but the deadline came and went 3 times, and somehow something else always took precedence. Your friend tells you she is happy for you, but when you share good news, her smile arrives half a second late, and it leaves her eyes before it leaves her face. None of these people are necessarily lying, not deliberately, not cynically. Most people genuinely believe what they say in the moment they say it. But behavior is not controlled by what we believe we are. Behavior is controlled by what we actually are, by the patterns grooved into us through years of habit, fear, desire, and emotional conditioning. And that is why behavior, in the long run, is almost always more honest than language. This is not a dark idea. It is not a reason to become suspicious of everyone around you. On the contrary, it is an invitation to something far more beautiful. It is an invitation to truly see people. Not the curated surface they present, but the full, complicated, fascinating human being beneath. And when you learn to see people that way, clearly, curiously, without rushing to judge, you become something rare in this world. You become someone who truly understands. Think about the people you trust most deeply in your life. Think about the mentor who seemed to know what you needed before you asked. The friend who could tell something was wrong just by the way you walked into a room. The leader who made people feel genuinely seen and understood. What they all share is not some magical gift. What they share is a cultivated skill. The skill of paying attention to the whole person, not just the words that person is producing in a given moment. That skill is learnable. Not only is it learnable, it is one of the most transformative things you will ever develop. Because when you understand people more accurately, everything in your life changes. your relationships deepen. Your communication becomes more precise and effective. Your empathy expands in ways that change how people feel around you. You make better decisions because you are reading situations more clearly. You stop being blindsided by the behavior of others because you learn to see the signals that were always there. We are going to go on a journey together through the hidden language of human behavior, through the psychology of why people do what they do, through the art of observation without judgment, through the signals that emotional life sends when words are not enough, through the patterns that habits and choices quietly reveal, and through the deeper, richer listening that transforms how you connect with the people around you. This is not about reading minds. This is not about catching people in lies or exposing hidden agendas. This is about understanding, genuinely, deeply, humanly understanding why people behave the way they behave, what their actions reveal about their inner world, and how that understanding can make you a more empathetic, effective, and connected human being. Because here is the truth that so few people grasp. Every person you have ever met is telling you who they are. Constantly, loudly, not always in words, but always in the beautiful, complex, endlessly readable language of behavior. The only question is whether you are listening. Let us begin. To understand why people behave the way they behave, we first need to understand what drives human behavior at its core. And the answer, when you strip it down to its essential architecture, is both simple and breathtakingly complex at the same time. Every human behavior, at its root, is an attempt to meet a need. That is it. That is the foundation. Every action, every word, every withdrawal and every reach, every explosion of anger, and every careful silence, all of it is an attempt, however clumsy or sophisticated, to meet a need. Abraham Maslow gave us the famous hierarchy, the idea that human beings move from meeting basic survival needs toward belonging, esteem, and ultimately self-actualization. But what Maslow's framework suggests, and what decades of behavioral psychology have confirmed, is that human beings are not random. We are not arbitrary. Even in our most confusing and destructive moments, we are motivated. We are always moving towards something. Even when it looks from the outside like we are simply falling apart. So when someone behaves in a way that confuses or frustrates you, when a colleague constantly interrupts conversations, when a partner becomes cold and distant, when a friend cancels plans repeatedly, when someone lashes out over something that seems minor, the question that unlocks understanding is not, what is wrong with this person? The question is, what need is this behavior trying to serve? Let us talk about motivation, because it is more layered than it appears on the surface. Human motivation operates on at least 3 levels simultaneously. There is the conscious level, where people are aware of what they want and can articulate it. There is the social level, where people's behavior is shaped by what they believe others expect of them, or what they feel they are supposed to want. And there is the deeper level, the emotional and psychological subterrane, where the real engines of behavior often live. These 3 levels frequently conflict with each other, and it is that conflict that produces so much of the puzzling, contradictory behavior we observe in others and, if we are honest, in ourselves. A person might consciously want a promotion, but at the social level, they may feel that visible ambition is unseemly, that wanting too much makes you greedy, and at the deeper level, they may harbor a fear of success rooted in a belief that greater visibility means greater risk of rejection or failure. So they sabotage the very outcomes they claim to want, and they genuinely cannot explain why. They are not performing contradiction. They are caught in it. This is why judging behavior at face value is so often misleading. What appears as laziness is frequently fear wearing comfortable clothes. What appears as anger is frequently grief or humiliation that has found no other exit. What appears as indifference is frequently a protective strategy developed by someone who has learned, through painful experience, that caring too openly leaves you too exposed. Emotions are the central drivers of human behavior in ways that even modern psychology continues to map and expand. Neuroscience has shown us that emotional processing is faster than rational processing. The brain's emotional centers receive and react to information before the rational prefrontal cortex has even had a chance to weigh in. This means that most human responses, especially in socially charged or stressful situations, are emotionally generated and then rationalized afterward. We feel first. We think second. We explain later, often to ourselves as much as to anyone else. This has profound implications for how you understand people. When someone reacts strongly to what seems like a small thing, when a comment triggers a disproportionate response, when a minor inconvenience produces outsized frustration, it almost never means that the small thing is what is actually driving the reaction. It means the small thing has landed on something older, something deeper, something already sore. The present trigger is real, but the charge behind the reaction is borrowed from something the person is carrying. Personality is another layer through which behavior is filtered, and it is one of the most misunderstood elements of human psychology. Personality is not a costume someone puts on or takes off. It is not a mood. It is the relatively stable pattern of emotional reactivity, relational style, coping strategies, and cognitive tendencies that a person has developed over a lifetime of experience and temperament. And while personalities are not rigid cages, people grow, adapt, and change. They do create consistent patterns that, once you learn to see them, become remarkably readable. Some people are naturally oriented toward social connection. For them, belonging is a primary need, and social exclusion registers in the brain as genuine pain. Neuroimaging research has confirmed that social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. These individuals will often go to considerable lengths to maintain harmony in relationships, sometimes at the expense of their own needs or honesty. They may avoid conflict, not because they lack opinions, but because the threat to belonging feels genuinely dangerous to their nervous system. Other people are more internally oriented. Their sense of safety and self-concept depends less on social connection and more on autonomy, competence, and internal consistency. For them, having their independence constrained or their competence questioned triggers a very different kind of alarm system. They may not seem to need as much social warmth, but they have equally deep needs. They are just organized around different values. Then there are those whose primary driver is significance, the need to matter, to have impact, to be recognized for their contribution, and those whose deepest need is security, the reliable, predictable, trustworthy certainty that the ground will not shift beneath their feet. Understanding which of these primary drives most strongly organizes a person's behavior is one of the most useful keys you can carry when trying to make sense of why someone does what they do. Attachment theory, which emerged from John Bowlby's research in the mid-20th century and has been refined and expanded dramatically since, gives us another powerful lens. Our earliest relationships with caregivers, parents, siblings, wire the nervous system for certain patterns of connection. They teach us whether intimacy is safe or dangerous, whether needs will be met or ignored, whether closeness leads to warmth or to pain. And those early patterns, imprinted at a neurological level, follow us into every significant relationship we form as adults. A person with what researchers call a secure attachment style tends to move through relationships with relative ease and confidence. They can be close without losing themselves, and they can tolerate conflict and repair. A person with an anxious attachment style tends to be hypervigilant about signs of rejection or abandonment. Small signals trigger large alarms, and they may cling, over-communicate, or escalate as strategies to restore felt security. A person with an avoidant attachment style has often learned, early and painfully, that needing others leads to disappointment, so they have built an identity around self-sufficiency, and intimacy can feel genuinely threatening, even when they desire it. None of these styles are character flaws. They are adaptive strategies, ways the nervous system learned to protect itself in the environment where it developed. Understanding this, truly understanding it, changes everything about how you interpret difficult behavior in others. The partner who goes cold during conflict is not cruel. They are protecting themselves the only way they know how. The friend who needs constant reassurance is not weak. They are carrying a wound that never fully healed. The colleague who never asks for help is not arrogant. They are someone for whom needing help once meant being abandoned with it. Social needs add yet another dimension. Human beings are deeply social creatures. We evolved in groups, and group belonging was historically a matter of survival. The psychological mechanisms that regulate our social behavior are ancient and powerful, and they operate largely below the level of conscious awareness. Status, belonging, fairness, trust. These are not soft concerns. They are hardwired priorities that shape behavior in ways we often do not recognize or acknowledge. When someone at work seems irrationally competitive, they may be responding to status, threat signals their nervous system is sending out. When a group turns cold on an outsider, they are often responding to in, group out, group dynamics that are older than civilization. When a person who has been treated unfairly reacts with what seems like disproportionate emotion, they are often responding to a deeply wired sense that the social contract has been violated, and that if they do not push back, it will happen again. Understanding these foundations does not mean excusing harmful behavior. It means understanding it accurately. And accurate understanding is always the first step toward meaningful response. There is a difference between looking and seeing. Most of us look at people constantly. We are surrounded by other human beings nearly every waking hour, and our eyes register their presence, their expressions, their actions. But seeing, truly seeing, is something rarer and more demanding. It requires us to slow down. It requires us to suspend the rapid-fire conclusions our minds are constantly generating. It requires us to become, in a very real sense, curious. The human mind is a pattern recognition machine of extraordinary power. This capacity for rapid pattern recognition has enormous survival value. It allows us to make fast decisions in situations where speed matters. But it also has a significant cost when it comes to understanding people. Because our pattern recognition system is deeply biased. It is biased toward confirming what we already believe. It is biased toward interpreting ambiguous information in ways that fit our existing models of the world, and it is biased toward making judgments, fast, confident judgments, that close off further inquiry long before we have gathered enough information to actually understand anything. When a stranger scowls as they pass you on the street, your mind instantly generates an interpretation. They are rude, they are angry, they are having a bad day. The conclusion arrives fully formed, without invitation. But you do not know whether they received terrible news an hour ago. You do not know whether they are dealing with chronic pain. You do not know whether that particular expression is simply their resting face, or whether they were squinting into the sun. You generated a complete story from a fragment of data, and then, most often, you forgot that you did it, because the story felt like a fact. This is what psychologists call the fundamental attribution error, the deeply human tendency to attribute other people's behavior to their character and personality, rather than to situation, circumstance, or context. We do this constantly and automatically. We see someone cut in line and we think, that person is inconsiderate. We do not think that person is late for a flight, or that person has been standing in a different line for 40 minutes and was redirected here, or that person grew up in a culture where queuing works differently. None of those explanations excuse the behavior, but any of them might explain it. And if we never consider them, we are not understanding people. We are performing judgment. The first practice of genuine observation is what we might call the pause before the story. When you notice a behavior, a sharp word, an unusual withdrawal, an unexpected reaction, instead of immediately generating a narrative about what it means and what kind of person would do such a thing, you pause. You let the behavior simply be a fact. You say to yourself, I observed this. I do not yet know what it means. And that pause, as small and simple as it sounds, opens a space that judgment always forecloses. In that space, curiosity can enter. Curiosity is the fundamental instrument of the skilled observer, not suspicion, not analysis, not evaluation. Curiosity, the genuine, open-handed desire to understand. When you look at someone's behavior through the lens of curiosity, rather than judgment, you stop looking for confirmation of what you already think, and you start looking for information you do not yet have. What is this person trying to do? What need might be driving this? What is the context that surrounds this moment? What do I not know that would change how I see this? Curiosity has a quality that judgment lacks. It makes the people around you feel it. People can sense, at a remarkably subtle level, whether they are being observed with warm curiosity or with evaluative judgment. When someone feels that they are being judged, they close, they perform, they manage the impression they are making rather than simply being themselves. And in doing so, they become less readable. Because you are no longer seeing them, you are seeing their performance of how they want to be seen. But when people feel genuinely curious attention without agenda, without evaluation, they tend to open. They say more than they planned. They relax into themselves. And in that relaxed, unguarded state, they reveal far more of who they really are. This is why the most perceptive observers of human behavior are not the most analytical. They are the most present. They are the people who have developed the capacity to be fully here, not thinking about what to say next, not evaluating what is being said, not filtering the information through layers of preconception, but simply here, receiving, watching, attending. One of the most useful distinctions in developing observational skill is the difference between observation and interpretation. An observation is factual. It describes what happened. She was quiet during the meeting and left before the conversation ended. That is an observation. An interpretation is a story about what the observation means. She was upset about what I said last week. That is an interpretation. It may be accurate, it may not be. But the critical error is when we mistake our interpretation for a fact. When we behave as though the story we generated is as real as the behavior we observed. Skilled observers hold their interpretations loosely. They generate them. It is impossible not to, given how our minds work, but they hold them as hypotheses rather than conclusions. They look for additional information that either supports or challenges the hypothesis. They remain open to being wrong, and this willingness to be wrong, counterintuitively, makes their eventual understanding far more accurate than the confident conclusions of people who stopped questioning early. Context is everything in human behavior. A behavior that is alarming in one context is perfectly reasonable in another. Crying at work may suggest distress, or it may suggest that someone has just received the best news of their life. Anger directed at you may be about you, or it may be the overflow of a day, a week, a year that has nothing to do with you, and you simply happened to be in the room when the container finally filled past its limit. Silence may mean withdrawal, or it may mean someone is so fully engaged in thinking that they have temporarily gone inside themselves. The same behavior can have radically different meanings depending on the person, the situation, the history, and the moment. This is why single Q thinking is one of the most reliable ways to misread people. No single signal, no one facial expression, no one word, no one gesture tells you anything definitive about what is happening inside another person. Behavior must always be read in clusters, in patterns, in context. The relevant question is never, "What does this one thing mean?" The relevant question is, "What does this pattern of things, in this context, with this person, in this moment, suggest might be true?" Another essential practice of non-judgmental observation is the recognition of your own projections. We inevitably bring our own emotional history, our own fears, our own needs, our own unresolved conflicts to every encounter with another person. When someone's behavior reminds you at a visceral level of something painful from your past. When a colleague's criticism lands with a force that feels outsized. When a partner's brief distraction triggers anxiety that seems disproportionate. That heightened charge is almost always a signal, not a signal about them, a signal about you, about something in your past that is being activated by this present situation. The ability to recognize, "This is mine, not theirs," is one of the most significant markers of emotional intelligence and one of the most difficult to develop. It requires consistent self-awareness, honest self-examination, and a genuine willingness to sit with discomfort rather than immediately directing it outward. But it is transformative, because when you can separate what belongs to you from what belongs to the other person, you begin to see them with a clarity that is simply unavailable to those who are constantly projecting. Learning to observe without judging is ultimately a practice of humility. It is the recognition that you do not know what is happening inside another person's experience. You cannot fully know. You can observe, hypothesize, inquire, and listen. But the interior of another human being is never fully accessible to you. No matter how well you think you know them, holding that reality that fundamental mystery at the center of every human encounter, keeps your curiosity alive. It keeps you from closing prematurely, and it keeps you always in the position of a student rather than a judge, and students learn so much more than judges do. Marcus was the kind of person who prided himself on being direct, not aggressive. He would have clarified that distinction quickly and with some feeling, just honest, just clear. In a world full of people who said what they meant and then took it back, who smiled and then complained behind closed doors, who agreed in the room and disagreed in the hallway, Marcus had decided long ago that he would not be that person. He said what he meant. He meant what he said, and in his estimation, this made him easier to understand, easier to trust, and easier to be around than most people. What Marcus had not noticed, what Marcus, in fact, had no framework for noticing, was that while he was focused entirely on what people said, the people around him were communicating constantly through channels he had never learned to read. He had been with his partner, Elena, for 4 years. By most objective measures, it was a good relationship. They had the same sense of humor. They agreed on the things they believed should matter: finances, future plans, values. There were no dramatic arguments, no betrayals, no crises, and yet, somewhere around the 3rd year, Elena had started to feel invisible in a way she could not quite name, and she had started telling Marcus. In every way except with words. She stopped volunteering opinions in conversations where she used to jump in immediately. Marcus noticed. He thought, she must be tired. She has a demanding week at work. He filed it and moved on. She started spending Sunday mornings with a cup of coffee and a book in the other room, where she used to spend them with him on the couch. Marcus noticed. He thought, she is an introvert. She has always needed recharge time. This is healthy. He filed it and moved on. She responded to his stories about work with shorter responses than usual. Still interested, still kind, but something slightly dimmed. Marcus noticed. He thought the stories are probably getting repetitive. He tried to make them more interesting, but he never asked what was happening in hers. There was one evening he remembered afterward, when he was finally forced to look at all of it together. They had been at dinner with friends, and the table was full of warmth and conversation, and at one point someone had asked Elena about a creative project she had been working on for months. Something she cared about deeply, and Elena had begun talking about it, hesitatingly at first, then with more energy, her voice rising, her hands moving, the way they always did when she was genuinely engaged. And Marcus, without thinking, had turned to another friend and started a different conversation. Not rudely, not dismissively, simply because his mind went there, and he did not notice what he was interrupting. What Marcus did not see was the moment Elena's energy changed. The slight contraction. The sentence that finished itself smaller than it started. The way she did not bring the project up again for the rest of the evening, or for the weeks that followed. He did not see it because he was not looking for it. He was listening to words, and Elena had not said anything wrong. The words Elena used during that period, if you transcribe them and read them without context, might have seemed relatively neutral. She said she was fine. She said nothing was wrong. She said, when Marcus asked generally if things were okay, that yes, they were. She was not lying, exactly. She was testing. The way people do when they are uncertain whether the other person is actually available to receive what is true. She was sending out small signals and waiting to see whether they would land. and they did not land. Not because Marcus was cruel, but because Marcus had never learned to hear them. What he was missing was the pattern. Any single signal in isolation could have been explained away by 100 benign causes, but the accumulation, the quieter presence, the shorter responses, the withdrawal from shared spaces, the dimming energy, those were not individual data points. They were a conversation, a patient, sustained, aching conversation that had been going on for months. At work, the same dynamic played out in a different register. Marcus managed a small team, and he genuinely believed he led them well. He was fair. He followed through on commitments. He gave credit when things went right. But there was someone on his team, a woman named Dana, whose performance had been declining quietly for months, and Marcus had attributed it to any number of explanations, none of which involved asking Dana directly what was happening. He had noticed that Dana stopped offering ideas in team meetings. He had interpreted this as confidence issues. She'd always been a little quieter than the others. He had noticed that she completed tasks on time, but with a quality that felt slightly below what she was capable of. He attributed this to stress, to distraction, to whatever external factor people carried into work with them that wasn't his business. He had noticed that she no longer stayed for the informal conversations that happened after meetings ended, when people lingered and talked about things that weren't on the agenda. He thought, she is probably just busy. What he did not see was that 6 months ago, a project Dana had led had been quietly reassigned to someone else without explanation. That in the moment of reassignment, Dana had sat very still and said, "Of course, whatever you need," while her hands were flat and hard on the table. That she had walked out of that meeting and said nothing about it for weeks. To Marcus, to colleagues, to anyone, because she had interpreted the silence around it as a message that what she had felt about it did not count. Marcus was not a bad manager. He was not a bad partner. He was a person who had developed one extremely strong skill: the ability to communicate clearly through language, and had never developed the parallel skill of reading the fuller, richer, more complicated communication that surrounds and underneath language constantly. He had confused the absence of explicit complaint for the presence of genuine okay-ness. He had confused his own clear communication for a shared understanding. He had looked at the surface of interactions, the words exchanged, the agreements reached, the factual transactions completed, and believed he was reading the whole story. But he was reading only the page. The book was something else entirely. The shift, when it finally came, was not dramatic. It did not arrive in a confrontation or a crisis, though Marcus had braced for that somewhere at the back of his awareness. It arrived in a quiet moment with Alina late on a Tuesday evening, when she set down the book she had been reading and looked at him for a moment without speaking. And something in that look, something in the quality of the stillness before she spoke, made him finally stop. He did not say anything. He just waited, and in the waiting, something changed. The ordinary ambient noise of his own thinking quieted, and he saw her, not the version of her he had constructed from words and agreements and shared logistics, but her, the actual person. And she was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "I feel like I disappear sometimes," she said finally. "Not because of anything you do, just I don't think you know what I'm actually thinking very often. And I've stopped trying to say it because I don't think I know how." Marcus stayed with that for a long time, and something that had been closed in him very gradually began to open. He had been listening his whole life. He had simply been listening only to words. Emotions are not accessories to human experience. They are the operating system. They run beneath every decision, every interaction, every relationship, and every rupture. To understand people, you must first understand emotions, not as states to be managed or overcome, but as information, rich, complex, physically expressed information about what is happening inside someone at any given moment. The psychologist Paul Ekman spent decades studying emotional expression across cultures and arrived at a finding that significantly changed how we understand human emotion. There are a small number of fundamental emotions: fear, anger, sadness, joy, disgust, surprise, and contempt, whose facial and physiological expressions appear to be universal across cultures. A person in a remote village in Papua New Guinea makes the same facial movements when experiencing fear that a person in Midtown Manhattan makes. Emotion has a biological grammar that transcends language and culture. The body speaks emotion before the mind has finished processing it. But Ekman's research also revealed something subtler and more practically significant: that people are extraordinarily skilled at suppressing, masking, and blending their emotional expressions. We learn very early in life that not all emotions are acceptable in all contexts. Children are told not to cry. Adolescents learn that vulnerability is dangerous. Adults in professional settings learn to perform neutrality or confidence regardless of what they are actually experiencing. And so, while the raw biological expression of emotion is universal, what we actually see when we look at another person's face is typically a complex, edited, socially managed version of their inner state. This is why micro-expressions matter. These are the involuntary, extremely brief flickers of genuine emotion that cross a face before the social mask reasserts itself. They last, in some cases, less than a fifth of a second. They are not manufactured. They cannot be fully controlled, and they often reveal something the person is actively trying not to show. A flash of contempt beneath a surface of polite disagreement. A flicker of fear behind a presentation of confidence. A microsecond of sadness in a face that is otherwise performing fine. You do not need to train yourself to catch micro-expressions with scientific precision to benefit from this understanding. What you need is simply to slow down enough in important interactions to attend to the face, not as a static backdrop to conversation, but as a live, changing, extraordinarily expressive communication channel. When you notice that someone's expressed emotion and their facial behavior seem not quite to match, when the words say calm, but something around the eyes says otherwise, that is information worth being curious about. Emotional contagion is another phenomenon that shapes our interactions in ways we rarely recognize. Emotions are literally contagious, not metaphorically, neurologically. Mirror neurons in the brain fire when we observe another person expressing an emotion, activating some of the same circuits in us that would activate if we were experiencing that emotion ourselves. This is the neurological basis of empathy. It is also why spending time with chronically anxious people tends to make us feel more anxious, and why genuine laughter is nearly impossible not to join. We catch each other's emotions with something very close to physical transmission. This means that when you walk into a room and feel a sudden, inexplicable shift in your own mood, you may not be experiencing your own emotion. You may be catching the room's emotion. The tension between two people who haven't spoken directly about their conflict yet can fill a shared space with a particular atmospheric pressure that everyone in the room absorbs. The grief of one person can settle into the shoulders of everyone nearby before a single word is spoken. Learning to notice these shifts in your own emotional state and to ask where they might be coming from is a valuable form of emotional perception. Emotional regulation, or the lack of it, is one of the most revealing things to observe in another person. How someone handles frustration, disappointment, conflict, or uncertainty tells you an enormous amount about their inner resources, their early experience, and the coping strategies they have developed. Some people have what psychologists call a wide window of tolerance, a broad range within which they can experience strong emotions without becoming dysregulated, overwhelmed, or reactive. They can sit in uncertainty without it becoming panic. They can hold conflict without it becoming catastrophe. They can be disappointed without it becoming despair. Others have a narrower window. For them, certain emotional triggers produce rapid escalation. The emotion spikes before the rational mind can catch it, and the response comes from a place of pure reaction rather than choice. This is not a character flaw. It is a physiological reality shaped by temperament and often by early experience. People who grew up in environments of chronic stress or unpredictability often develop a more sensitively calibrated alarm system, one that fires faster and louder because in their early world it needed to. What looks from the outside like overreaction is often, from the inside, a perfectly reasonable response to a pattern the nervous system learned to be afraid of long ago. Understanding this changes how you relate to people in their difficult moments. When someone reacts with what seems like disproportionate intensity, the compassionate and accurate response is not to categorize them as dramatic or unstable. It is to recognize that you are witnessing the activation of an old wound by a new trigger. And that kind of recognition, quiet, unhurried, non-judgmental, has the remarkable quality of making people feel safe in a way that immediate correction or problem solving never does. Emotional intelligence, the capacity to perceive, understand, manage, and use emotional information effectively, is now understood to be at least as important as cognitive intelligence in determining how well people navigate life. And its most fundamental component, the thing that underlies all the rest, is emotional awareness. The ability to notice what you are feeling and name it with some precision. Research by the neuroscientist Matthew Lieberman has shown that labeling an emotion, putting a name to what you are experiencing, actually reduces the subjective intensity of that emotion. The act of naming creates neural distance between the feeling and the response. It is the neurological basis of the ancient wisdom that says understanding your feelings gives you choice about them. When you bring this awareness to your interactions with others, when you notice that someone seems to be experiencing something they cannot or have not named, when you reflect back what you are perceiving with gentle, tentative care, you offer them something genuinely rare. You offer them the possibility of being understood at the level of experience, rather than merely at the level of content. And that kind of understanding has a particular kind of power. Not the power to fix, not the power to advise, the power to make someone feel less alone in what they are carrying. Emotions, in the end, are the great universals. Every human being experiences fear and joy, grief and relief, anger and peace. We experience them in different registers, in different contexts, with different triggers and different expressions, but the core of it, the felt reality of emotion, is something no person alive has escaped, and that shared reality, when we actually let ourselves acknowledge it in each other, is one of the most potent foundations for genuine human connection. The body speaks. This has become almost a cliché. So many popular books and seminars have been built around the idea of reading body language that it has entered the cultural lexicon as a kind of pseudo-science, a shortcut to truth, a magic decoder ring. Crossed arms mean you are closed off. Touching your nose means you are lying. Avoiding eye contact means you are hiding something. If only it were that simple, and if only that simplicity were not so potentially harmful. The truth about body language is more interesting, more nuanced, and ultimately more useful than the pop psychology version. The body does communicate, constantly, richly, and in ways that often express what words are edited not to. But no single gesture, posture, or expression tells you anything definitive about what is happening inside another person. Context is everything. Baseline is everything. Clusters of signals are everything. And a healthy dose of epistemic humility, the recognition that you might be wrong, is essential at every step. Let us start with what the body actually does in emotional and social situations, because the physiology is fascinating. When a person experiences stress, the autonomic nervous system kicks in. The famous fight or flight response that evolved over millions of years to prepare the body to deal with physical threat. But in the modern world, social threats trigger exactly the same physiological cascade. Being challenged in a meeting, being in conflict with a partner, feeling evaluated by someone with power over you. These social experiences produce the same basic physical responses that a predator on the savannah once produced. Heart rate increases, respiration shallows and quickens, muscles tense, blood flows away from the digestive system and toward the extremities, and the brain goes into rapid threat assessment mode. Many of the tells in body language are simply the physical signatures of this stress response. The shallow breathing that changes someone's voice under pressure. The shoulder tension that draws the body in on itself. The leg bouncing or finger tapping, that is the body's attempt to discharge nervous energy through movement. The difficulty maintaining sustained eye contact when the brain is overloaded with processing threat signals. These are not secret codes. They are physiology, and once you understand them as physiology, you can read them with much more accuracy and compassion. Posture is one of the most consistent and readable expressions of internal state. Open posture, shoulders back, chest accessible, body oriented toward the other person, generally signals engagement, comfort, and openness. Closed posture, shoulders drawn in, arms across the body, torso turned slightly away, generally signals protection, discomfort, or withdrawal. But here is the critical qualifier: generally. An individual who was raised by a critical parent may habitually round their shoulders in social settings, regardless of whether they are comfortable. Someone with chronic back pain may sit in ways that look like withdrawal, but are simply pain management. A person from a culture where direct eye contact is considered disrespectful may avoid it even in situations where they are fully engaged and present. This is why baseline matters more than any individual signal. Baseline is the pattern of behavior a person exhibits when they are neutral, relaxed, and comfortable. It is their personal default, and it is the reference point against which any departure becomes meaningful. If a person normally speaks with their hands and in a particular interaction their hands go still and flat on the table. That departure from their baseline is potentially significant. If a person who normally holds sustained eye contact suddenly finds it difficult to do so, that shift is worth noticing. But you can only notice a shift if you know where the person started. This is also why reading strangers from body language alone is so much less reliable than the popular understanding suggests. Without a baseline, you have no reference point. You are interpreting signals in a vacuum, which is exactly as reliable as you would expect vacuum interpretation to be. The friend you have known for years, whose body language you have catalogued across thousands of interactions. You can read something meaningful in their posture and expression. The stranger you have just met, you are largely projecting. Facial expressions, as we discussed in the context of emotion, are somewhat more universal in their core forms, but enormously complex in their social manifestations. We layer social performance on top of biological expression from a very early age. The polite smile that reaches the mouth but not the eyes. What Duchenne, the 19th century physiologist who first described it, called the non-Duchenne smile, is a widely recognized signal of managed rather than genuine warmth. The genuine smile, the one that involves both the lip muscles and the orbital muscles around the eyes, is much harder to fake because we have significantly less voluntary control over those eye muscles. But even this requires caution. Some people have genuinely warm smiles that are socially calibrated and do not fully involve the eyes. Some people have naturally more restricted facial affect. Their face moves less in general, not because they are hiding something, but because that is the degree to which their emotional experience expresses in their face. Introverts often report that people assume they are unfriendly or disengaged because their external expression is quieter than that of extroverts. That quieter expression is not suppression. It is simply a different relationship between internal experience and external display. Tone of voice is, in many ways, one of the most reliable channels of emotional communication, more reliable, in some research, than either words or body language. The acoustic properties of the voice change significantly under different emotional states. Anxiety tends to raise pitch and increase speech rate. Depression and sadness tend to lower pitch and slow tempo. Anger produces increased volume and a particular kind of vocal tension. Genuine enthusiasm produces a distinctive variability in pitch that is very difficult to convincingly fake. And contempt, one of the most corrosive emotions, often shows up as a kind of flatness or slight downward inflection at the end of phrases, a tonal signal that what is being said is somehow beneath full engagement. Paying attention to the music of how something is being said, the tempo, the pitch, the rhythm, the pauses, the places where the voice catches or drops or hardens, gives you information that the words alone consistently fail to carry. Proximity and touch are rich communicative channels that vary enormously across cultures, individuals, and relationship types. The distance at which someone chooses to position themselves relative to you, what anthropologist Edward Hall called proxemics, signals their felt level of intimacy and comfort. People who feel close and comfortable close the physical distance. People who are uncertain or uncomfortable subtly increase it. Watching someone's adjustments of position in an interaction, the small movements toward or away, can reveal a great deal about how they are actually feeling. But always, with the caveat, Body language is a rich source of hypotheses. It is not a source of certainties. The error is in reading a signal and treating it as proven fact. The wisdom is in reading a signal and asking, what additional information would help me understand this more clearly? And then seeking that information, often simply by asking, with genuine curiosity and care, how the other person is actually doing. The body speaks, but like all speech, it must be understood in its full context to be understood at all. Aristotle said that we are what we repeatedly do, and behavioral psychology, thousands of years later, has produced overwhelming evidence that he was right. Not what we say we are, not how we wish to be seen, not even how we think of ourselves in our more flattering moments of self-reflection, what we repeatedly do. The patterns of behavior that play out week after week, month after month, in the unglamorous, unobserved ordinary of daily life. That is what most accurately reveals who we actually are. This is perhaps the most important principle. In all of reading people, look for patterns, not moments. A single data point proves almost nothing. A pattern of behavior sustained over time is one of the most reliable truths you will ever find about a human being. When you want to understand someone's actual values, not their espoused values, the things they say they believe in, but their operative values, the ones that actually direct their choices. Look at where they consistently spend their time, their money, and their attention. These three resources are finite. We have only so many hours in a day, only so many dollars, only so much attentional bandwidth, and how we allocate those finite resources tells a far more honest story about what we actually value than any statement of belief or intention ever could. A person who says they prioritize family but consistently chooses work commitments when the two conflict is not a hypocrite. Exactly. They are a human being in whom the pull of work is currently stronger than the pull of family for whatever complex reasons: financial anxiety, identity investment, external validation, fear of stillness. The pattern does not tell you the reason, but it tells you the truth, and seeing the truth, even gently, even without judgment, gives you something to work with that the stated value never provides. Habits are the architecture of behavior. Charles Duhigg's research on habit formation identified a three-part cycle: a cue that triggers the behavior, the routine behavior itself, and the reward that the behavior delivers. Habits form because the brain, which is an efficiency-seeking organ, learns that a particular behavior reliably produces a particular result, and it automates that behavior to save conscious processing power. The problem is that habits formed in the past, including habits of thought, feeling, and relational response, do not automatically update when circumstances change. They continue running their automated routines long after the conditions that created them no longer exist. This means that many of the behavioral patterns you observe in people are not fully chosen. They are automated. They are the running code of earlier decisions, sometimes much earlier decisions, that the person may not even be consciously aware of. When you see this, it changes how you relate to the pattern. It becomes less, why does this person keep doing this thing that clearly doesn't work? And more, what was the original logic of this pattern? And does it still serve them? And consistency is one of the most powerful indicators you have available as an observer of human behavior. Consistent behavior, the things someone does reliably, across different contexts and different emotional states, is one of the most trustworthy signals of character and priority. Anyone can behave generously on their best day, Anyone can be patient when nothing is demanding their patience. Anyone can be honest when the truth has no cost. But what does this person do on a difficult day? How do they behave when they are tired, when they are under pressure, when they have just been disappointed? How do they treat people who can give them nothing? The philosopher Immanuel Kant spoke of treating every human being as an end in themselves, rather than merely as a means. A useful behavioral corollary to this in the context of reading people is to observe how someone treats others who have nothing to offer them. The server at the restaurant, the parking attendant, the maintenance worker, the colleague who is clearly below them on the status ladder. How does a person treat people with no power over their outcomes? That behavior, consistent, reflexive, unrehearsed, is a window into character that the most polished professional behavior often fails to reveal. The patterns in how people handle difficulty are particularly revealing. Some people, when faced with a problem, move toward it. They engage, they analyze, they act. Others move around it. They delay, they find workarounds. They manage the anxiety rather than addressing the source. Still others move away from it. They avoid, withdraw, disengage. None of these is inherently superior, and all of them serve in certain contexts. But the pattern of which strategy a person defaults to, and which they default to under maximum pressure, tells you something essential about their psychological makeup and their relational style. The same is true for how people handle mistakes. Do they take responsibility quickly and move toward repair? Or do they deflect, blame, minimize? Do they become defensive when challenged? Or do they stay curious about whether the challenge contains truth? Do they apply to themselves the same standards they readily apply to others? The relationship a person has with their own failings is one of the most accurate indicators of their psychological maturity and their capacity for genuine intimacy. Repetitive relationship patterns are worth particular attention. If you notice that someone has the same conflict with different people in different contexts, the same dynamic with multiple bosses, the same pattern across multiple romantic relationships, the same friction with friends across different friend groups, the probability that it is always the other person's fault decreases significantly with each repetition. Patterns that follow a person across different relationships are not coincidences. They are the person's contribution to a dynamic that keeps recreating itself because they have not yet seen their role in it. This is not about blame. It is about the profound truth that we tend to recreate the relational dynamics that feel familiar to us, even when those dynamics are painful. We do this not because we enjoy pain, but because the familiar is predictable, and the predictable feels safe, even when it is not. Recognizing this pattern in others and in ourselves is the beginning of the kind of understanding that makes genuine change possible. The small behaviors, the routine ones, the ones that seem too minor to analyze, these are often the most telling. How someone reacts when they are cut off in traffic. Whether they say please and thank you in the ordinary transactions of the day. How they respond to inconvenience, with flexibility or with brittleness. Whether they ask follow-up questions when you share something personal, or whether the conversation returns almost immediately to them. Whether they remember things you have told them, not the big, dramatic things, but the small ones, the Wednesday dental appointment, the worry you mentioned in passing, the thing you were nervous about that no one else would have bothered to track. The small things are not incidental to character. They are character. Because character is not what happens in the dramatic, high-stakes moments that everyone notices. Character is what happens in the 10,000 ordinary moments no one is watching. Most people think of listening as a passive activity. Hearing the words someone is saying, processing their content, preparing a response. But this understanding of listening captures only the surface of what genuine listening involves. True listening, the kind that makes people feel genuinely heard, genuinely understood, genuinely seen, is one of the most active and demanding things a human being can do. The distinction between hearing and listening runs deep. Hearing is the physiological reception of sound. Listening is the full engagement of attention, with the words, with the tone, with the emotion beneath the tone, with what is not being said, but is present in the space around what is being said. Listening at this level requires you to temporarily set aside your own internal narrative, not your perspective. You do not need to abandon your perspective to truly listen. But the constant stream of interpretation, evaluation, and response, preparation that runs beneath most of our so-called listening, that needs to pause. And for most people, that is very difficult. Research by communication scholars suggests that in ordinary conversation, we spend the majority of our time thinking about what we are going to say next, rather than fully attending to what the other person is currently saying. We are physically present but mentally elsewhere, composing, analyzing, evaluating, while only partially receiving what is actually being offered. The result is that much of what happens in a conversation passes through us unprocessed. We catch the words, we catch the argument, but we miss the music, the emotional undertone, the hesitations, the things that are tried and then abandoned, the meaning that lives between the sentences. Active listening, as it is taught in therapeutic and coaching contexts, is the practice of bringing your full attention to what the other person is communicating on every level, and reflecting back periodically what you are receiving, both to confirm your understanding and to signal to the speaker that they are genuinely being heard. It is not a technique in the mechanical sense. When done well, it is invisible. It simply looks like profound, undivided attention. The quality of the silence you bring to a conversation matters enormously. There are many different kinds of silence. There is the silence that is waiting, the pause where you are simply holding your breath until it is your turn to speak again. There is the silence that is uncomfortable, the gap that both people are rushing to fill because something about the emptiness feels threatening. And there is the silence that listens, the pause that holds space, that communicates, I am still here, I am still with you, you do not need to rush, there is more room. That third kind of silence is a gift. It is experienced by the speaker as permission to go deeper, to find the truer thing, to say what they have been circling. Pauses in speech carry as much information as the speech itself. When someone pauses at a particular moment in a story, when their flow stops, when they seem to briefly go somewhere interior before returning, that pause is almost always pointing towards something significant. The pause might mark the edge of comfort, the place where the story is approaching territory that feels risky to put into words. It might mark emotional weight, a moment in the narrative that still carries a charge for the person telling it. It might mark ambivalence, a place where two things are true simultaneously and the speaker is not sure which one to offer. When you notice a pause and let it be, when you do not rush to fill it, When you simply stay present and let the other person return at their own pace, you often receive more than you would have if you had kept the conversation moving. The deeper, truer thing tends to live just past the point where people usually change the subject. What people do not say is often as important as what they do say. This is one of the quieter arts of listening, the ability to notice absence, to notice the subject that keeps approaching and then turning away. The question that gets answered with a different question. The topic that everyone at the table implicitly agrees not to address directly. The person who has not spoken in 20 minutes in a group, that assumes they are simply quiet rather than silenced. Omissions can be deliberate, people choosing not to say something, or they can be unconscious. People not saying something because it is too loaded to approach directly, because they do not have language for it yet, or because they have told themselves a story in which that thing does not matter or does not apply to them. Either way, the omission carries information, and the skill of noticing what is absent rather than only registering what is present is one of the more advanced capacities you can develop as a listener. Emotional subtext is the current running beneath the surface of language. It is what makes the words, "I'm fine," capable of meaning half a dozen different things depending on how they are delivered. It is the difference between a "yes," that means yes, and a "yes," that means I don't want to argue about this right now. It is the complaint about being tired that is actually a bid for connection and care. It is the story about a colleague that is actually about a fear that the speaker does not yet know how to name. Responding to emotional subtext, to what someone is expressing beneath the words, rather than only to the content of the words themselves, changes the entire quality of a conversation. It signals to the other person that you are listening at a depth they may not have expected. And that kind of listening tends to produce a very particular response. People lean in a little. They go a little deeper. They find, sometimes to their own surprise, that there is more they want to say, because someone is finally actually there to receive it. The capacity to listen fully, without rushing toward solution or conclusion, is one of the most healing things one human being can offer another. Not because listening fixes anything, but because feeling genuinely heard is, in itself, a profound form of being known, and being known, truly, accurately, without performance, is one of the deepest hungers of the human soul. Social intelligence, the capacity to navigate human relationships with skill, sensitivity, and depth, is not a talent you either have or do not have. It is a capacity that develops through practice, through genuine engagement with other people, and through the sustained willingness to remain curious about the complexity of human experience. At its core, social intelligence rests on one foundational capacity: the ability to hold in mind a perspective that is genuinely different from your own, not just to acknowledge that other perspectives exist. That is relatively easy, but to actually inhabit another perspective from the inside, to feel the internal logic of how the world looks from where someone else stands, to understand why their conclusions make sense given their experience, even when those conclusions differ from yours entirely. This is what is technically referred to as theory of mind. The cognitive ability to understand that other people have their own mental states, beliefs, desires, and experiences that are distinct from your own. Human beings develop this capacity in early childhood, and it is considered essential to normal social functioning. But theory of mind exists on a spectrum. and the upper reaches of that spectrum. The ability to understand, not just that others have different perspectives, but to accurately model those perspectives in their complexity and nuance, represent a level of social intelligence that most people never fully develop. Empathy, which is sometimes used interchangeably with theory of mind, but is actually a distinct capacity, involves not just understanding another's perspective cognitively, but also feeling something of their experience emotionally. The distinction between cognitive and affective empathy matters in practice. Cognitive empathy, understanding how someone thinks and why, is enormously useful for communication, negotiation, leadership, and conflict resolution. Affective empathy, actually feeling some resonance with what another person feels, is the basis of genuine compassion and deep emotional connection. The development of empathy is inseparable from the development of self-awareness. This might seem counterintuitive. Why would knowing yourself help you know others? But the connection is direct. The more clearly and honestly you understand your own emotional landscape, your fears and needs, your triggers and defenses, your biases and assumptions, the less you project that landscape onto others. You begin to see the difference between what you are feeling and what they are feeling. You develop the capacity to be moved by their experience without mistaking it for your own. You become, in a very real sense, more available to other people precisely because you are not so caught up in managing the noise of your own unexamined inner world. Perspective taking is a practice that can be deliberately cultivated. It involves, in any given interaction, consciously shifting from your own vantage point to the other person's, asking yourself, what does this situation look like from where they are standing? What do they know that I might not know? What history do they bring that shapes how they are experiencing this moment? What would I be feeling right now if I were them? This is not about abandoning your own perspective. It is about expanding your field of vision to include theirs, and that expansion, however partial, however imperfect, is one of the most reliable ways to increase both the accuracy of your understanding and the quality of your connection. Social intelligence also involves what we might call reading the room, the ability to sense the emotional temperature of a group, the unspoken dynamics at play, the power structures and allegiances that organize how people position themselves relative to each other. Every group, no matter how small, no matter how informal, has a social structure. There are people who hold more influence and people who hold less. There are alliances and tensions that predate you and will outlast you. There are unwritten rules about what can and cannot be said, about who is listened to and who is routinely interrupted, about which topics are safe and which are charged. Reading these structures quietly, without drawing attention to your observation, gives you a kind of social map that makes every group you enter more navigable. You begin to understand not just what is being said, but who has permission to say it and why. You notice whose contributions get picked up and built on, and whose get acknowledged and then effectively dropped. You see the person on the edge of the group, whose quietness is being read as disengagement, but is actually the quietness of someone who has learned that speaking doesn't lead to being heard. These observations, held with care and without agenda, give you information that allows you to move through social contexts with far greater grace and effectiveness. Emotional boundaries, the capacity to be fully present with another person's emotional experience without being swept away by it. are another essential component of social intelligence. This is the difference between empathy and enmeshment. Genuine empathy involves being moved by what the other person is experiencing while remaining grounded in your own separate self. Enmeshment involves losing that ground, taking on the other person's emotions as your own, feeling responsible for their pain, regulating your own state by managing theirs. Enmeshment may feel like empathy to the people involved, but it is actually a form of undifferentiation. And it makes genuine understanding more difficult, not less, because you are no longer seeing the other person clearly. You have become too entangled in their experience to observe it. The socially intelligent person brings warmth without losing themselves. They care deeply without making the other person's emotional state their responsibility to fix. They can sit with someone in pain without requiring that the pain resolve quickly. They can disagree with someone they love without experiencing the disagreement as a threat to the relationship. These capacities do not come naturally to most people. They are developed, often through significant personal work, over time. Personality diversity is one of the great ongoing teachers of social intelligence. The world is populated with people who are wired fundamentally differently from you, who process information differently, who find energy in different contexts, who experience safety and threat through different triggers, who express care through different channels. What feels like warmth to an extrovert, spontaneous visits, calls without appointments, social abundance, may feel like intrusion to an introvert. What feels like appropriate independence to someone with an avoidant style may feel like abandonment to someone with an anxious style. What feels like honest directness to someone with a high confrontation style may feel like aggression to someone who has learned to approach conflict differently. None of these differences are errors. They are the astonishing variety of human wiring that a single species can produce, and learning to understand and navigate that variety, to translate across difference rather than demanding that others become more like you, is one of the most generous and practical things social intelligence allows you to do. Repair is the underrated core competency of all sustained human relationships. Every relationship, without exception, experiences rupture, moments of misattunement, misunderstanding, conflict, hurt. What distinguishes relationships that strengthen over time from those that slowly corrode is not whether ruptures happen. It is how ruptures are repaired. The capacity to say, "I got that wrong," without catastrophizing. The capacity to receive an apology without weaponizing the wound. The capacity to work through conflict and emerge on the other side with a relationship that feels somehow more real, more solid, more trusting for having survived the difficulty together. This is not just interpersonal maturity, it is a practice. And every time you choose repair over withdrawal, every time you choose honesty over comfortable avoidance, you are developing the social intelligence that makes you genuinely good at being in relationship. 6 months after that quiet Tuesday evening, Marcus would not have said he had become a different person. He was still direct. He still valued honesty. He still moved through the world with the same basic temperament, forward-facing, action-oriented, more comfortable with problems he could solve than with feelings he could not name. But something in him had shifted, something quiet and significant. It had started simply. He had begun, in conversations with Elena, to ask questions he did not already know the answer to. Not logistical questions, not, "What time is dinner?" or "Have you talked to your sister?" but real questions. The kind he had previously assumed were unnecessary because he believed he already understood. What was that like for you? What do you actually think about this? Is there something I'm missing here? Simple questions, but asked with the intention of genuinely not knowing, genuinely wanting to find out. They changed the quality of everything. He had started noticing things he had always seen, but never truly registered. The way Elena held her coffee cup in both hands when she was talking about something that mattered to her. The way she laughed at something with her whole body when she felt completely at ease. The way her voice dropped slightly when she was disappointed. None of these were secrets she had hidden. They had always been there. He simply had not been looking with enough care to see them. And in seeing them, in actually receiving this fullness of information that Elena was always broadcasting, he began to understand her in a way that changed how he loved her. Not dramatically, slowly. The way light changes in a room when a window you didn't know existed is finally opened. Things that had seemed like friction between them began to make sense in a new register. Her need to process things through conversation, which had sometimes felt like excessive rumination to him, was her way of thinking, not a problem to solve, but a mode of engagement to honor. His need to arrive at conclusions quickly, which she had sometimes experienced as dismissiveness, was not impatience with her, but rather his own particular relationship with uncertainty. Neither of them had been wrong. They had simply been different in ways that neither of them had ever had the language or the attention to name. At work, things also changed, slowly and in ways that accumulated. After months of watching Dana's quiet disengagement, Marcus had finally done the thing he had been circling for a long time. He had asked her to lunch. Not a meeting. Lunch. And he had not arrived with talking points. He had arrived with the simple intention of being interested in what Dana's experience actually was. What she told him, carefully at first, and then with more trust as he continued to ask and listen, rather than defend and explain, was something he had not expected, and something he could not unhear. She had felt, for nearly a year, that her contributions were being received but not valued. That the project she had led had been reassigned without explanation, which she had experienced as a judgment on her capability that no one had ever directly discussed with her, that she had stopped offering ideas in meetings because the response, or more precisely, the absence of response, had taught her that it was safer not to. Marcus had wanted to argue with some of it. He had wanted to explain the project reassignment, to provide context that would change how she had experienced it. But he had, for once, not done that. He had let himself sit with the fact of her experience, not as a critique of his management, but as information, real information about what had actually happened between them. And he had said, simply and without qualification, "I am sorry. I didn't understand what I was communicating without meaning to, and I want to understand better." He could not have said exactly when it had happened, but somewhere in the months that followed, Dana had come back, not to where she had been, to something more herself than that, as though the having been heard had freed up something she had been using to hold her guard. She offered ideas again, not with the same tentativeness as before, but with a kind of measured directness that suggested she had decided, with some evidence to support the decision that it was worth trying. Marcus had not become a perfect observer. He still missed things. He still moved faster than the moment sometimes warranted. he still occasionally caught himself listening only to the words when the music beneath them was trying to tell him something important. But the difference was that now he knew he was doing it. Now he had enough awareness to pause, to look again, to ask, and that pause, that small, deliberate act of choosing to look more carefully, had changed the texture of nearly every significant relationship in his life. He thought about it sometimes, what the years looked like before he had started paying attention this way. How much had been there? How much information? How much communication? How much of the real lives of the people around him that he had simply moved through without receiving? Not because he hadn't cared. He had always cared. But caring without attention, he now understood, is incomplete. Care needs eyes. Care needs the willingness to be changed by what you see. He was not trying to read minds. He was not trying to decode people or anticipate every feeling before it arrived. He was simply finally paying attention to what was said and what was not said, to what the body expressed while the words were being constructed, to the patterns that repeated over time, quietly insisting on their truth, to the pauses where the more honest things waited. He was listening, finally, to the whole conversation. And the whole conversation, it turned out, was far more extraordinary than the one made only of words. There is an old practice in certain meditation traditions of sitting in a public place and simply watching people. Not with judgment, not with agenda, just watching. The way someone reads a message on their phone, and their expression passes through 3 different emotions in the space of 2 seconds before settling into something neutral. The way a young child reaches up for a hand that isn't there yet and holds the reaching for a moment before looking around. The way 2 people having a difficult conversation lean incrementally toward each other, even as their words create distance. The way someone laughs and then, for just an instant, looks lost. People are not puzzles to solve. This is perhaps the most important thing you can carry away from everything we have explored together. People are not codes to crack, systems to decode, problems to reduce to their component parts so that you can manage them more effectively. This framing, the framing that treats understanding people as a strategic advantage in a world of competing interests, is a misuse of everything we have been discussing. It shrinks the extraordinary complexity of a human being into something instrumental. And in doing so, it actually makes you less capable of true understanding, because genuine understanding requires that you hold people as the full, irreducible, endlessly complex subjects that they are. People are stories, and stories, by their nature, cannot be fully grasped in a single reading. They unfold over time. They contain contradictions that do not resolve. They have subplots that sometimes matter more than the main narrative. They have unreliable narrators, including the people themselves, who may not fully know their own story yet. And they almost always mean something different when you come back to them with more life behind you. What we have been building throughout this journey together is not a system for analyzing and categorizing people. It is a set of capacities for observation, for curiosity, for emotional awareness, for deep listening, for empathy, that together produce a richer, more accurate, more generous way of encountering the human beings in your life. These capacities do not make you infallible. They do not give you access to certainty about what is happening inside another person. What they give you is better questions, better attention, and a more grounded openness to what you are receiving. The goal is not to judge faster, The goal is to understand deeper. Think about what changes in your life when you bring this quality of understanding to it. The conflict with a colleague that you have been interpreting as hostility reveals itself, when you look more carefully, to be anxiety wearing the costume of aggression. And that understanding changes how you respond, and how you respond changes the entire trajectory of the relationship. The partner who has seemed distant and closed becomes legible to you in a new way, not because they changed, but because you began to read the signals they were always sending. The friend who frustrates you with their indecision shows you. When you look with curiosity rather than judgment, a person genuinely caught between competing needs that they have not yet found a way to name. Understanding is not agreement. You can understand why someone behaves the way they behave and still disagree with that behavior. You can empathize with the need beneath someone's action and still need them to stop taking it. Understanding gives you more options, more nuance, more room to maneuver. It does not require you to accept or excuse what is genuinely harmful or unjust, but it does require you to recognize the person, the full, complicated, historically formed, emotionally driven, need-organized person behind the behavior, and in that recognition, something shifts. Not just in how you understand them, in how they feel around you. People sense when they are being seen, when genuine attention is turned on them. Not the evaluative attention of someone trying to determine whether they meet a standard, but the curious, warm, fully present attention of someone who is actually interested in who they are. They respond. They open. They come a little closer to their actual selves. And from that place, real connection becomes possible. When you learn how to observe carefully, listen fully, and empathize sincerely, you begin to see what others miss. You see the grief behind the anger. You see the fear behind the bravado. You see the longing behind the withdrawal. You see the person who is trying, imperfectly, sometimes clumsily, always humanly, to navigate a life that is harder and more complicated than anyone shows on their surface. And when you see that, something happens to your own heart. It becomes a little less armored, a little less certain, a little more spacious, because the same understanding you are extending to others, if you are truly engaged in this practice, inevitably turns inward as well. You begin to see yourself with the same patient, curious, non-judgmental attention you are learning to offer others. You begin to understand your own patterns and needs, your own defenses and desires, your own places of stuck, and your own directions of growth. You become, in the deepest sense, more whole. There is a reason the world's wisdom traditions, across cultures and centuries, have returned again and again to some form of the same teaching, that the deepest intelligence is the intelligence of the heart, the intelligence that moves toward people rather than away from them, the intelligence that slows down in the presence of complexity rather than reaching for the shortcut of judgment, the intelligence that knows that every human being, no matter how difficult, no matter how confusing, no matter how wounded or wounding, is carrying something real and worthy of genuine curiosity. You do not need to agree with everyone. You do not need to trust everyone. You do not need to understand every person who crosses your path. But to the people who matter, to the ones you love, the ones you work with, the ones you choose to let in, you can offer something that is rarer and more valuable than advice, than solutions, than any form of expertise you might possess. You can offer the extraordinary gift of being truly seen, And in a world where most people are moving fast, speaking loudly, and listening only to words, that gift is one of the most powerful things one human being can offer another. Every person tells a story, not only through words, but through everything they do, everything they choose, everything they reveal in the unguarded moments between the managed ones. Learn to listen to the whole story, and watch what happens to every relationship in your life.